So we're quickly going to revise some photography basics, which help us to understand how to improve our photography better when we get to start imaging the eye itself. So the three things we most commonly think of in photographing the eye, and most photographs, to be perfectly honest, are focus, exposure, and depth of field. Depth of field is very important when you're photographing a magnification, and for lots of our ophthalmology images we are doing just that. So focus first. Focus is the most important thing to get right. Almost everything else you can do, everything else you can fix, in post-processing. However, if it's an unfocused image, however much you play around with that in Photoshop or on your phone, you are going to struggle to get useful information. So focus is by the single most important thing to get right in all of your images. Smartphones, they really struggle with this because they are trying to do everything. They're trying to take good wide-angle photographs, trying to do portrait photographs, also trying to get close to the subject as well. So we're trying to do everything. There are compromises, and the compromise for most smartphones is that they are almost universally quite poor at taking close-up photographs. So the key thing to work out with your phone and when you're trying to get your clients to take photographs for you is to work out how close you can get the camera to the eye and it still remain in focus, your minimum focal distance. If you're too close to the eye, then you will always have a blurry image. Other things affect focus as well, particularly camera shake. So if there's not enough light and you're holding that camera unsteadily, then you also get blur as well. But actually your camera is very good at correcting for that. In lots of clever ways, stabilizing the lens and doing things to affect the sensitivity of the camera to light. But what they really can't do is focus the image for you. So focus is your priority. Exposure is obviously very important. If you've got too much light, then use all too white and you can't see enough detail. If it's too dark, you won't be able to see much either. However, it's important to remember that your camera's sensors are much more sensitive than we are. So when you have a very dark image, it's often a lot of information hidden away in that image which you can't see initially, but by processing it afterwards you can. You can maximize that by photographing using your camera to take images in certain file formats, particularly the raw RAW file format, which many camera apps allow you to select, which allow you to capture much more information than your standard JPEG. So if sometimes you're trying to focus an image, you really are struggling to get the right exposure. Now, if you get a darkly exposed, dark image, then you can be optimistic that with a little bit of tweaking, you can get some good information out. We often get sent photographs, we get them sent every day actually from clients or vets around the world, and it's very common for us to take a dark image on our phones or computers to lighten those images to get more information out. So if you're going to choose an image to be either over or underexposed, I would always choose to underexpose it. This example here shows a lovely cathedral, Amiens in France, which I was lucky enough to visit last year. We're going out for a walk at night and I wanted to photograph it, but this is the best photograph I could get with my camera. I shot it in RAW and then a little bit of tweaking, increasing the exposure, and I got this beautiful image. Still, if you look closely, it's a bit pixelated, but all that information was hidden in that dark image. So just to re-emphasize that, dark images often carry a lot of information. I love small things, and I love photographing spiders and insects in the garden to practice my photography. So you'll see a few spiders may pop up in this talk. Apologies if you don't like them. These are two images of the same spider, one overexposed and one underexposed. The underexposed image, which actually looks quite nice in this shadow type appearance, when I start to tweak it, I can actually get the detail of the individual cobwebs. Whereas when I try to do the same for the overexposed image, I couldn't get anything more than what I already saw. To add extra light to if you're an underexposed image, you can try and add extra light either by having a longer shutter speed or more often than not adding more light. We use that using a modelling light, often a pen torch or a head torch held from the side. And just to remember that the intensity of light falls off very rapidly with changes in distance due to what's called the inverse square law. So you can make large changes to the amount of light by making small movements with your hand. But remember not to add too much light, as if you overexpose it, you will lose Lots of important information. Depth of field is very important, as mentioned before, because when we're photographing a magnification. At magnification, we find that depth of field becomes narrower and narrower and narrower. The more magnified we are, the smaller the depth of field. I love this photograph of my colleagues who work with in Bristol, Matt Dobson, and a photograph of a little gecko. He's photographing his nose here, and it's beautifully in focus, but we can see the eyes, which are only about 12 millimeters behind it, are out of focus. So it's remember, each depth of field will decrease with as magnification increases. Now we can sometimes get that can be a problem for us, but sometimes it can also help to highlight images, highlight pathology. This is a photograph of a horse's eye. There's the lid margin here, and we got the pupil margin here. You can even see the tear film actually between the cornea and the eyelid margin, and the depth of field effect means that this part of the eye is the same distance from the camera as this part, so these are beautifully in focus and these at either side are not. You can actually use that to highlight pathology. If we have, for example, an ectopic cilia, sorry, dystechia, at this point in the eye, we're going to highlight that by using depth of field. You can also use it in some quite cool ways. This is a macro photograph of the granular iridicula of a horse. And at magnification, we can't get the whole granular iridicula in focus at the same time. And when we upload all of those images, which are very similar to Google, which happens automatically from my phone, if you go to Google Assistant, then it will find similar looking images and it will automatically add them together to make these little GIFs, which can be a very good way of demonstrating depth and three-dimensional views in our images. Another way of doing that also is to use video and use a video with a macro lens to give a similar appearance. So one of my little spidery friends, this is a giant house spider, we see them in England. And they're not as big as this. You'll be pleased to know they're probably only about twice as big as a normal house spider. They're just on my stairs going to bed one evening. But I love trying to photograph the smallest eyes I can when I see them to practice my macro photography, just again using an iPhone and a little macro lens we'll talk about later. So why should we use our smartphone to image the eye? Well, the miracle of smartphones is because of their design. It is really possible to use these as a digital ophthalmoscope, and that's really what we're going to try and persuade you of over the next part of the talk. Now, the key to using the smartphones as ophthalmoscopes is what we call the fundic reflection, the reflection of light from the back part of the body of the eye, which would include the tapetum lucidum, where present, and the retina, of course, are present as well. That allows us to have these amazing images of this horse. We've met this horse already, this beautiful lens change. You can see individual lens fibers which have been damaged. We see small lens vacuoles at the back of the lens and larger lens vacuoles at the equator of the lens. I know that if we're focused on the posterior lens capsule, because my anterior lens lesion is out of focus because the depth of field is narrow. This image on the right, it shows a horse which has had a keratectomy. It's an area of the superficial cornea being removed here. And we can use the tapetum reflection to highlight the edge of this keratectomy wound here. And so there's an area of just a little white area here of infiltration. Also nicely highlights the superficial stromal vessels coming to heal it. You can even see the edge of the epithelial deficit, the epithelium here. So this is exposed stroma. This is the edge of the epithelium here. And this is the edge of the keratectomy side. Key to getting the fundic reflection is having the correct light to lens distance. Light to lens distance is a simple concept. It's the, if you think of this camera on the bottom here, we have a flash, either a pop-up flash or a flash beside it, for example. And then we have the lens here, which actually views the image. Now, this is the eye we're taking a photograph of. If the flash is close to the lens, then the light, as it hits the eye, it becomes near coaxial, and coaxial light in the same acts as our visual gaze, will go straight to the pupil of the patient we're looking at and bounce off the fundus. We see that in photographs of humans as red eye reflection. So the closer your flash is to your camera, the more likely you are to get a fundic reflection. Now you can improve that, if you like, by moving further away from your patient. As you move your camera further from the patient, then the angle subtended between the light and the camera becomes effectively smaller. So if you've got a camera which has got a light a long way from your lens, and you're a little bit further away from your patient, you'll get you'll get a better fundic reflection. So this is just a few over at my cameras which I used to use was my SLR. I measure the distance from my light to the lens is about 9 centimeters. With my little Ixus pocket camera, it's about 3 centimeters. And with my iPhone, it's just about ½ centimeter, just over 5 millimeters between the light and either one of those lenses. And if I can get that distance to be smaller than the size of the pupil of my patient, and I can see into the eye in the same way as I could with an ophthalmoscope, it allows us to use our camera as a fundus camera. And we use it in 2 different ways. In the horse, we almost exclusively use it to do what's called direct fundoscopy. In these situations, what this means is we're using no lenses. All we're using is the camera. We're focusing infinity, and we're getting the camera and its light as close as possible to the pupil. In the same way as you use a direct ophthalmoscope, that allows us to get amazingly detailed views of the fundus. You can also use it with a diagnostic lens, and then you can use this. You can use the light from the camera to both produce and image the indirect view. This works well in small animals with smaller pupils, and can be done in the horse. But the large size of the equine eye means that there's no advantage to using the lens. We get much better images by direct fundoscopy. So what's the best phone to use for imaging the eye? Well, as long as you've got a phone in your pocket and it has a light which we can get to turn on at the same time as you take a photograph, you'll be able to photograph the fundus. I spend a lot of time looking at different phones, and I have my favourites. I don't use Androids very well. It's very much, so you have to forgive me being a great iPhone biased. But for me, the iPhone X, so the first of the iPhone X's, is currently, I think, the best iPhone for taking fundus photographs. The distance between the lens and the camera is the smallest of any iPhone, apart from the iPhone 4 and 4S, which are quite old phones now. So my iPhone X's are the best taking fundus photographs. The iPhone 7 and 8 Plus, the larger cameras, are going to have 2 lenses. They're positioned separate to the light, which means that we can put a macro lens onto either one of these lenses, the cameras, and allow us to use the on-camera light to illuminate our macro photographs. So if you get an iPhone 7 or 8, a bit harder to use for fundus photographs, because this is the only lens which is close enough to the light to be used. But you can take very good macro photographs, and both lenses can be used in the horse. Which is the best app for photographing the eye? This changes all the time. At the moment, I'm writing this talk in 2020. My favourite one is the iPhone is called Pro Camera. Lots of functionality. I can change lots of things, but most importantly, I can turn the light on and off and change light intensity. What I used for many years is called Camera Plus. We've got an older iPhone, and Camera Plus Legacy is the one to use. A newer iPhone and Camera Plus 2, both those allow you to have a light on at the same time, but don't allow you to reduce the intensity. For the Android, the best one I found so far is called Open Camera, which is a free photography app by Mark Harmon. Again, very powerful, but I can't reduce the light intensity with that app. So how do you get started? Well, the easiest way to get started is to, without downloading any apps at all, is to use whichever phone you have and turn it to video mode. In video mode, if you then select the light to be on, the flashlight on continuously, and then start recording, that will allow you to have both camera and light at the same time. It also allows you to get moving images, which helps when you're struggling to, when you first start off and you may find it harder to focus on certain parts of the eye by taking a moving image, and you're taking lots and lots of focused images at different levels. So we met this patient before with the anterior and posterior lens pasties, anterior and posterior. I can zoom in whilst taking the video to look at these more carefully. I'm moving left and right, up and down, which allows those opacity to change their position relative to each other. And then zooming in order to see individual opacities. Now we're moving the camera closer and closer to the eye until we get to the fundus. We can see the tapetum, the non-tapetum, the optic nerve. We can see how the scrunched up detached retina at the bottom. So that's just with your any phone with the video mode and the light turned on.